we want to be craftspeople. So what I think it means is you just care a lot and you put so much of yourself into it and you care about the details and you care about improving it over time. It's yours. You have ownership. It's not just a job, a product that we build. This is an expression of ourselves.
From Tuple, this is Distributed, where we show how world-class engineers and their teams tackle the challenges of remote work. I'm Jack Hanna, your host. Hey everyone. In this conversation, I speak to Steve Schoeffel, the co-founder and CEO of Whimsical. Whimsical is the all-in-one collaborative workspace designed for remote work and with a pretty strong point of view on it at that. Given that's what we talk about on the podcast, needless to say, Steve and I had a lot to talk about. We dug into the Whimsical Way and Steve's unique point of view on remote work. We talked about the challenges and joys of building a remote-first business, and we talked about what it really means to ride the waves of the co-founder and CEO title. This conversation was a blast. I hope you enjoy it. Steve, would you mind describing Whimsical for the folks in the audience who don't know?
Yep, absolutely. So Whimsical is an all-in-one workspace for collaborative work. And the idea is that you can do idea to execution all in one app. And so practically what that looks like is for ideas, you might have a project that contains all of it, and you have your project plan that's written up in a doc. And then you have some of your early project documentation. So think system architecture diagrams and user flows and sequence diagrams. You're planning things out. Maybe you have some brainstorming and sticky notes. Then you get into tasks, which are right next to that. And so typical Kanban board or list view and filtering and all that. And then you have posts. So posts are a way to project updates, to do individual check-ins or discussions, and you can do all that in one space. And so that's what Whimsical does, helps teams do their best work and do it efficiently.
You mentioned that today the company is about high 20s in personnel. It's fully remote. It's across a bunch of different countries. How big is the technical side of the house? So product design and engineering, just to help folks level set.
Yep. So if team's roughly 30-ish people, I want to say we have about 15 engineers, including a manager or two. We have 3 full-time designers. That doesn't include myself. And then maybe 4 in customer support, customer success, and a handful of other roles. And we span a lot of time zones. So we have a number of folks in New Zealand, and I'm based in Denver in the US. We have a bunch of people across the US. And then we go as far east as Latvia, where Casper's my co-founder is from and lives now. And so that's Northeast Europe. And we've got quite a few folks there and in between. So yeah, spans the globe pretty effectively. We're not in Asia, or some of the distant regions, but yeah, we've got a good time zone stretch.
Yeah, no kidding. So as I mentioned in preview before, Whimsical has a particular point of view on remote work, and I'd like to dig into that. You've encapsulated some of it in what is called the Whimsical Way, which folks can find on your website. We'll link to in the show notes. For the folks who aren't there now, what is the Whimsical Way?
Yeah, the Whimsical Way is a set of principles that we try to write down. And what we saw them as is distinctives of how does Whimsical really work? The company, how do we think about building product? How do we think about what's healthy for us? And so this has kind of been an evolving thing over the years. We've been going at it for 7+ years, and we would have these one-off conversations with folks and explain how we're working. And they'd be like, wow, that's so interesting or different. Or, you'd have these select conversations. And we said, at some point we need to write it down, put it in somewhere that it can be consumed more publicly. And we felt like the right time to do that was in the last couple of months, where we launched some new products. This was projects and posts that really feel like they start to fuel or enable more of the way that we're working and allowing other teams to work that way. So that's why we wrote it down. And it was a cool process. And, with anything like principle related, I think there's a lot that stays the same. And then there's little manifestations of that evolve and change through the years. But that's the Whimsical Way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the principles. I think it's made up of 7 different principles. You don't need to list all 7 of them here,
Sure.
But I am curious if there's 1 or 2 that you want to highlight that really speak to you most.
I think the very first one that we list and that it feels like more of like a foundational like capstone principle is async work. And why it's important, I think it enables us to span so many time zones effectively. It really has a huge impact on what work feels like in the day-to-day, week-to-week. So for instance, we don't have a lot of scheduled real-time meetings. So on average, an individual contributor, like an engineer or a designer, is going to have 2 to 3 hours of meetings per week. And they might choose to have ad hoc brainstorming sessions or pairing sessions, and that's totally fine, but they have so much freedom over their time. They might choose, well, I need to like get in 5-hour stretch of deep work and just sink into this problem, and they might do that. So the reducing the amount of meetings. The other thing that we do is we reduce the amount of real-time chat. So one of the things that people will, when they join Whimsical, so many people have made this comment, they'll be like, it's so quiet. Like what's going on? And we don't do a lot of at everyone at channel mentions. It's just a little bit more low key. And especially we've created this post product, which is, it's kind of like longer form, more thoughtful chat. It's closer maybe to email or something like that. And so we've been doing some experiments where like, how much more can we lean into that as opposed to Slack? But the idea here is that we want our communication to be as thoughtful as possible and less reactive. I think you kind of get into this sort of live chat, got to kind of get my words in here, or gets buried in the chat thread type of communicating. And so we try to go more documentation heavy. We lean on comments, async, like video recordings, this type of thing. And I think so okay. So just trying to describe what async looks like for us. And then if I had to extend that to what are some of the benefits that we see, I think you just have a lot of freedom. And so part of it is freedom of schedule. This is interesting actually. And I know Tuple, right? Like, so is a synchronous product, yeah. Right? Which we actually had a team do a project update where they're working on this really gnarly technical problem. And their async update the other week was, we had to pair 30 hours on Tuple this week, which I imagine, I don't know what you guys do internally, but I imagine that's like more than most. And, but I think that actually illustrates the beauty and the flexibility of async work. Is we're trying to strip down the extra stuff, the distractions. We're trying to do as much of it as we can through like written or kind of things that don't require like an immediate response or kind of like a real-time conversation, so that maybe sometimes we need to do the real-time thing. We need to do the pair programming or the kind of ad hoc brainstorming session. And then another example of just the flexibility that async provides is we can hire people in pretty random spots, which I think is cool. One of the interesting ones, an early employee who was awesome, her name was Rhoda. She lived on an island in Scotland, and she sheep farmed and took care of sheep, but also was super into tech. And so did both of those things. Super fascinating. So I think you can hire people in really interesting places and have flexibility to move around. We have people who will just kind of say, hey, like, I'm going to work from a different country for the next month, and it's in a different time zone, and it's no big deal. That's amazing. Send some pictures, show us what it looks like. Next week, our family is going to be in the Dominican Republic, and I'm going to be working and at least part of the time. And again, it's kind of like an FYI to the team, but then, business as usual. And so I think there's some really cool things that async enables, and it requires some other pieces of the Whimsical Way, which like trust and transparency, but it enables us, our remote team, and our style of working to function really well.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because on the surface, it feels like there's a little bit of a paradox there where it's like being async first to you means stripping out as much of the cruft as possible from scheduled recurring synchronous meetings, from the requirement to be participating in sort of ephemeral real-time chat, and instead prioritizing more durable artifacts of thought. So projects, notes, these things that can be referenced and referred back to over time. The consequence of doing that is if an individual needs to spend a bunch of time debugging something with somebody else or working through something difficult with somebody else, they have the time to do it, right? So like having this async first mentality also in a way can enable much more synchronous time when needed, but it's really kind of the flexibility that the system affords, which is kind of interesting. Some of the stuff that you're saying is in stark contrast with somebody else that I interviewed, and I wanted to pull at this a little bit because I find it fascinating. I spoke to a gentleman, Samit Jain. He's the head of engineering at a company called Sublime Security. And one of the things that he described in their culture was this feeling of buzz and energy that they get because they prioritize synchronous communication so much. They use tools that make it clear evidently that work is happening. They can feel the energy of other people's updates, their communication, and all of these things, which he attributes to be a huge driver of folks' ability to get things done quickly and at a high quality bar, because there is this energy that buzzes throughout their remote setup, much like a lot of folks have experienced in certain in-person environments. And so I'm wondering if you could describe Whimsical's culture a little bit and what it feels like to work there or work in the Whimsical way, acknowledging that it seems like, at least on the surface to me, to be probably quite different than what Samit was describing.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and I relate to that a lot because I think, like I mentioned, we've experimented with a lot of different ways of working and communicating. And so I think that's actually been pretty consistent with how I've felt. Is I think when things get too quiet and you're not hearing from people, you're like, is the work happening? Is there, like, are we moving quickly anymore? And so I think we've had to push against that and increase the frequency of our check-ins. And so some of the things that we've done there, hey, like, it doesn't need to be a synchronous thing, but post what you're working on and do that frequently throughout the week. At the end of the week, record a video of what it looks like so people can actually see it. And every time we do an all hands, let's do demos. Let's kind of show the work. Because I totally agree. It's been very consistent with my experience is you get energy from other people doing cool stuff, making progress. Even if it's not like that visible progress, maybe they're stuck, but they're just like, hey, I'm working really hard at this thing. We're trying to figure it out. But you just want to know, like, yeah, all right, we're all working together on this. And so there's been times, I think, where we've skewed a little bit too heavily toward the quieter side of things. And we've needed to kind of say, guys, we actually need to increase the communication for that sense of momentum and energy. So
yeah, I guess it's a balance is the takeaway, in that maybe there's a false dichotomy that I was sort of describing, in that you can, in fact, build in public and communicate thoroughly and frequently without it being live and synchronous. And so if you're posting updates pretty often, you're recording demos once a week, you can showcase your work and make it clear that work is happening and create that energy without it actually being in live conversations. There's one more aspect of the Whimsical way of working that I wanted to touch on, which is this concept of craftsmanship. I've heard you talk about it before. I've seen it in blog posts. It seems like it's a pretty big thing for you personally and for the company for that matter. And I'd love to just hear, like, what does craftsmanship mean to you and how does it show up in Whimsical's work?
Yep, it is an important thing. And it's one of those words that emerged for us when it was just Casper's and myself. Like, no one else. It was a very beginning. And it's actually interesting. So we started the company in Denver, Colorado. Casper's was here. His Latvian startup had gotten acquired by a company. So he comes over here for a couple years. I end up working at the same company. And then we kind of go off to start Whimsical. But at this time, we lived in the same neighborhood. So the first 7-8 months of Whimsical, we were working from his basement in person. So we were not, that was the only stretch of Whimsical where we were in person and not remote. And so we'd go on walks, kind of change things up, go to lunch together, kind of have lots of free flowing conversation, as I think a lot of those early months are about, is just kind of dreaming about what this company, what this product can be. It was a really amazing, fun time. But we were trying to describe like what is it that we're trying to accomplish here? What are we about? And we both had this drive to create something world class and something that we felt like just we put everything of ourselves into. And the word that came out was craftsmanship. It was like we want to be craftspeople. And so what I think it means, and I thought about it plenty over the years because it's literally been there from the start. I mean, I think it has a lot of different components, but I think at the heart of it is you just care a lot. And because of that, you put so much of yourself into it, and you care about the details, and you care about improving it over time, and it's yours. You have ownership, and it's not just a job, a product that we build. This is an expression of ourselves. And so what that practically looks like is when we were thinking about hiring the first couple of people to Whimsical, we said, well, who are the most craftsmanship oriented people we can possibly think of that we've worked with in the past? Because we were kind of thinking, all right, let's pull from our kind of private network for these first couple of people, like just known people. And we hired a couple of those folks, and they're still here today. And I think it was a very helpful kind of framework for looking for the right people to join us. So we still use that as a way of evaluating folks. It's in the performance reviews, and it's something we talk about a lot internally. We'll call out, we have an appreciation channel. So it's like, what do you appreciate? Calling out when people go the extra mile, where it's clear that there's quality there. Some of my people that I looked up to, there's a guy, Frank Slootman, who's a former CEO of Snowflake and a couple other companies. And he borrowed this term from Steve Jobs originally, but this insanely great, is it insanely great? Like, that's what we're going for. I think that feels very much at the heart of craftsmanship. Like, you're on this like journey, this pursuit of insanely great. And Frank Slootman has this quote. He said, try using that like on a daily basis for what you're working on, and you'll find that it's pretty clarifying, because you say, is this insanely great? Do I get excited about this? Like, am I like, this is fantastic? Because most of the time it's more like, well, I think this is probably good enough to go. Let's run with it. It's fine. But if we can kind of get it to that insanely great level, that's where I think craftsmanship it feels like it's more kind of there, present and alive.
Yeah. Do you have any habits, rituals, processes at the company that help drive towards insanely great, or help you embody this theme of craftsmanship? Because this is one of those things that I feel like it's mostly uncontroversial, or like common to agree that like, we want to do insanely great work. We want the quality to be super high. We want to think of ourselves like craftspeople. I think most would say that, but doing it is in fact quite difficult in my experience. And doing it consistently and repeatedly and across numerous people, quite difficult thing to do. And so I'm wondering, do you have any processes, systems, rituals, or habits as a team, or even as an individual, that allow you to produce insanely great work repeatedly over time?
It's a good question, because even in saying it out loud, I think there's a part of me that feels a little tension, because I know that the Whimsical product, for all of our care and attention, it's not perfect. Like, it has rough edges. And I think that's the reality, right? Is that even in some of the very best products, it's still not perfection. You're not getting to perfection, but I think it's a pursuit and a mindset. And so that's where kind of like, okay, it's all right. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we are kind of relentlessly like pursuing like this really high degree of quality. So, all right. So what does that look like? We've tried different things. One of the things that might be more different and controversial, and I don't even know how long we'll stick with it, but there was a time where, we were running some shape up style work, and you're using an appetite, and once that appetite is up, you kind of need to reevaluate. And of course you can kind of re-up on something. But I think what we kept finding was that the craftsmanship work, the details, just kind of the extra level of stuff was happening in the last like 5 to 10% of the work. And we kept hitting our appetite and we'd need to move on. And we was like, well, maybe we'll kind of come back to that. And so we kind of switched that up and just said, you know what? We're just going to go until insanely great to a reasonable degree. Like, obviously we can't just work indefinitely on like one thing, but we're just going to be less time constrained and more quality constrained. And so things will probably take longer because we're going to put more effort into them. So we need to be careful about the things we say yes to. And we have had some pretty long running projects, and maybe that's where you start to feel like, like maybe we do need to have some more safeguards in here. But that's one thing that we've done, which is to say the goal is this really high level of quality. It's not to get it done in X amount of weeks, or it's not okay, because we truly do want it. And I think that quality is something that customers actually experience. They don't experience how long it took you to build it. They experience like the end result. A few maybe other things that we've done are something newer that we're experimenting with is a quality czar position. Maybe a funny title, but we just want someone that's available for all the little polish, a little bit more reactive things that come in that you can't quite like justify. It's not going to make it on a roadmap or something. It's not like part of a bigger project, but some feedback will come in, or through like a research conversation or something like that, where we're like, that's actually a really good idea. The product should work that way, or we should change that. And so we now have someone that's available, and we kind of did it for a little bit, and then things changed in the company. And then we're like reinstating it because I thought it was pretty cool. So hopefully we stick with this. I think we will. But this person is just available to reactively kind of like build stuff and delight customers. Maybe there might be like a turnaround of a couple of days where it's like, yeah, all right, we made your change, or maybe even the same day in some cases. And so having someone that's like able to take the small stuff. And next week, actually, we're going to do a little polish and quality cycle. And we do this from time to time, a couple times a year. We'll just carve out, this time is 2 weeks. Sometimes we've done 4 weeks or even longer, where we're just saying, hey, we're actually taking a huge group of these small little paper cuts, things that could be smoothed over, refined, and we're just going to do them because I think in aggregate, they matter. I think you could look at one piece of it and you say, well, how many users are going to encounter this? Is it like a core part of the workflow? I don't think so. Does it matter? Let's focus on the big stuff. But I think to us, craftsmanship is seen, it expresses itself in the edges, in the details. Like, is that experience just dialed, the whole thing end to end? Man, whenever I start talking about it, I'm again like, there are so many places where we still have a ways to go. But that's, I don't know, those are some of the ways that it shows up for us.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you name both of those. Those are two things that we have also experimented with quite a bit at Tuple, because we feel very similarly that quality is experienced in the way something feels or makes you feel. Mm-hmm. And it's usually not any one discrete feature, but it's the sum of the polish.
Yes.
I want to shift gears a little bit because we've talked about some of the different ways that y'all work at Whimsical, and I think it's really interesting stuff. You make a tool for remote work after all, and so digging into how you work is quite interesting to me. But I also want to talk a little bit about what it's been like for you running a remote company. It's been 7-8 years now. I guess the first handful of months, as we talked about, weren't remote, but since then the company's been a remote business. What's been the toughest moment for you personally in building a remote company?
I think I would say that when things are going smoothly and the business is growing and we're adding people and there's good vibes, good energy, awesome. It covers over a lot of things that may not actually be that healthy right then. I think one of the most challenging things has been maintaining a really strong connection with my co-founder, where as things have progressed for Whimsical, we've moved further and further apart, just kind of as it would happen, right? And so what that looks like is we started in the same location, same neighborhood, working out of Casper's basement. About 7 or 8 months in, he moved up to Boulder, Colorado. And 2 years after that, he moved back to Latvia, where he's from. And so that's 9-hour difference. And what that I think started to look like was at 9 hours, the beginning of my day is the very end of his. And you can still talk and you still catch up on things. And, but it's like, you're not just having a casual lunch now or going on a nice walk where you can kind of just let the conversation flow. And I think around 2022, 23, we just had challenges in the business where we had raised a large Series A, we were scaling the team, we were adding a lot of headcount. All of a sudden, we were trying to just scale the business, do the kind of the classic thing, grow. But while we were adding all these people, some of our growth, our actual revenue growth was stalling out, and we had problems in the business. And it's a time where I think as co-founders, we could need to be these like foundational like parts of the business, and we need to be in lockstep and in really high alignment. And I think with all the craziness and the difficulty, that was actually the time where we were the least connected, which is unfortunate, right? And I kind of got to a point where we were trying to figure out like, what is the best path forward? And I think we had different visions at that moment. Like, oh, I think we kind of need to go in this direction. Casper was saying a different thing. Then we kind of have like the leadership team who is in the conversation as well. I think that was probably one of the hardest things that we've encountered, and to a point where I was like asking myself, is this still where I'm supposed to be? Like, am I still here? Now, crazy enough, as like the things would develop, shortly after there, I had my wife and I had our fourth kid, and then I was out for a stretch. And then when I came back, well, actually during that interim period was when we kind of had this conversation where Casper was like, hey, I actually feel most excited about starting like a totally new thing. And I think one of the ways that this would work out, perhaps maybe the only one that has the most continuity and like makes the most sense, is that you take my position. So that was kind of the genesis of us swapping roles. But it came on the heels of me feeling like, we're at odds and we're needing to like get more alignment. And I had reached out to him, Casper's, about that and said like, hey, what can we do? Like, do we need to go like work from the same place for a week or two out of the year where we just kind of get that in-person time? But yeah, I would kind of point to that as being some of the most challenging stuff that we've encountered, or that I've encountered personally.
Yeah, I can only imagine. When you think back to that time, was there a particular moment or conversation or thing that happened that really made it clear to you that you were misaligned and that something needed to change?
I think maybe one of the moments was we had a leadership meeting where everybody met up in New York City. This was 2 weeks before our baby was born. And so it was like a 4 or 5 hour flight. And I was like, I don't think I can go to this one. So I stayed in Denver. Everybody else was in New York. And this was kind of a meeting where we were trying to figure out what's the best path forward. So this was actually that couple day stretch. And so I think that one was the one where I was kind of laying out, hey, in a document, right? Kind of more like writing async forward. Here's my, like all of my thinking. This is kind of what I think we should do. And Casper's like had a different one and was like, this is actually what I think I should do. I was so the only one not in person, and then calling in and trying to kind of like explain, trying to be a part of the discussion. And meanwhile, that everybody else is in the same room. And I think what happened in that moment was everybody was like, well, we're going to go with what Casper's like suggested. And so I think that kind of like was probably, and it was right before I was headed out on paternity leave. And so, I said to like, I did some like self-reflection, like maybe this is actually really well-timed leave where I just kind of take a few steps back and let things like develop. We've actually increased our leave time. So we now have 4 months off, which is more than usual, but I really actually love it and believe in it. And I think it's maybe some of the good part of being a dual, like kind of US European company is sometimes we'll adopt more European practices, sometimes more US. But yeah, it was a long stretch of time. I took 3 or 4 months off after that 4th kid because we had kind of the longer policy in place at that point. And it was a time where I was just really just letting things like settle and kind of coming to peace with whatever kind of wherever things end up, just for me personally or for the business. And I think that's actually one of the big learnings that, and I feel like I have to relearn it a bunch, is if it's almost like a healthy detachment. Like I have attachment to our business. Like I love this business. I love the people working here. I love the product that we're building. I'm passionate about it. And I really want to see it succeed. And I want to work here for many, many years. We've talked about it as what if it's a multi-decade thing? What if it's the last job we ever work at? And I would love for that to be the case. But I think there's moments where it's such an up and down experience with so many surprises that so the lesson that I feel like I've learned is there needs to be a healthy detachment from your sense of purpose and well-being, that it can't be connected directly to the company, because then you're up and down, you're like all over the place. And what you really need is a more kind of like steady and long-term perspective.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for how to get there? Because I've certainly struggled with the same or a similar thing where so much of my identity, so much of my self-worth is wrapped up in my job, my perception of success in my job and the company I work for, et cetera. And I find it really difficult to find that healthy detachment, and have experienced some of those highs and lows that you've described as well. What have you learned, or what tricks have you developed to facilitate that healthy detachment?
I think it's hard. I think, and especially what I found is I mentioned before that there's an extra weight as a co-founder, and then as a like the person in charge, the CEO or whatever it is, the role is called. So I feel like I've experienced more of that in the last year plus than maybe in the first 6 years combined. I don't have all the answers. I think sometimes it's just I'm tired that day and I need to take a break. I need to like get some decent sleep if I can, go on a run. I've started running for maybe the first time in my life in the last year. So maybe that has something to do with it, but just kind of like paying a little bit more attention to my health. I think sometimes when I'm tired, I just like go a little bit more pessimistic. And I think that can be hard because you just are, seeing things like maybe not like the best situation. And so I think, so there's maybe some more like surface level things. I've tried to articulate this in a post or two, but I think a part of it is like it goes pretty deep. It cuts pretty deep, right? Like
Definitely.
What do you like? What are you living for? Like, what are your values? What is actually most important to you in your life? I think if you can honestly answer that question, I think this kind of gets at a cultural thing in startups sometimes where you have certain very successful founders who will unapologetically, like absolutely say the company, that is like the most important thing. And so you kind of got the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos and, these characters who are wildly successful with their companies, but they're also just saying like, this is it. Like, this is what I'm putting everything into. And so you see unhealth in like other parts of their life. And so for me, I think faith is a big piece of it. I hit a moment when I was kind of doing some soul searching, kind of in that time where I was just questioning, am I even supposed to be here? Or what does this mean for our family if I'm not working here, or, need to change this up? And then it introduces all these questions like, do we still live in this house? Like, this anchors a lot of things in life. And I was really grateful. I reached this point where I said, it's okay. It's okay. We could rent a house. We could go somewhere else. I could be in a new job and do something different. It wouldn't even have to be like my own company. And that's where, for me in particular, like faith, it's like, if I have a anchoring relationship with God as, okay, this is kind of the most important thing, all this other stuff can fluctuate and change, and I can hold it a little bit more loosely, then that gives me a much firmer footing and grounding. And so Sarah and I, my wife and I, were on a walk and actually talking, like had this conversation, where it's a huge unlock for us. It's just like a weight off of my shoulders, off of both of ours, where it was like, it's okay, and it doesn't all ride on making this one kind of startup successful and this version of what's going on with work and in our lives. So deeply personal for everyone, I think. But that was kind of part of it for me.
Yeah. Well, I think your point about it being personal is super resonant. I think it'll be a different thing for each person. Yeah. Well, Steve, we're coming up on time, and I want to make sure that we have time for at least one wrap up question before we go. It doesn't directly relate to the last thing that you were talking about, but I think a theme in this conversation is the benefit of remote work. It's a theme in almost any conversation that we have. You talked a lot about the different ways that you work at Whimsical, and so much of that is only afforded or is emphasized by the fact that your team is in fact remote. And that runs in contrast to what we're seeing now, where so many of these famous big tech companies that we've even mentioned here so far are forcing so many back to the office. And so I'd love to get your take. What is your take on big tech's big return to office push?
Yeah, it's a interesting topic for sure. And you kind of see different headlines coming out, different companies making choices. I feel like working style and where people do their work from is, look, it's a set of trade-offs, and you can do it both ways. The thing that I would say maybe concerns me about the big tech like return to office push is I don't know that it's coming from what is the best thing for our team? What is the best thing for our productivity and collaboration, and just kind of what our team actually wants? I think a lot of the time it comes from other external factors where it's sort of like we're paying for this expensive building. We need to use it. We can't get out of that. So we need to put people in the seats. I think sometimes it comes from a lack of trust in the team. And so it's a little bit more of a authoritarian kind of, hey, like, we don't really trust what's going on here. And so we need to try to control it. I think it's still challenging to do, but my opinion is that remote work is getting better and better, like with time. It's the tooling's getting better, the ways of doing this. It feels like sort of this inevitable future that things are more distributed, not less. And further, if you experience a good version of remote work, you're like, this is awesome. And I don't want to go back to, you must be in the office, 4 out of 5 days and all these things. I think giving people kind of the trust and freedom and treating them more like the capable adults that they are, to do great work and take care of their things and have the freedom to move around and, do what they need to do. That to me is the most important thing. And I think we're seeing more information coming out when you'll do these surveys or kind of gathering data where remote work actually outperforms in person in a lot of ways, in a lot of important ways. Like collaboration sometimes goes up, oftentimes goes up, and the kind of well-being of these workers goes up. I think Lenny Rachitsky recently did a survey just a couple of days ago where it was like tech worker sentiment, and smaller companies outperformed larger companies across the board. But another thing was the more remote things got, so remote first, like all remote, or hybrid but heavily remote, those were the two top performing in terms of worker sentiment. So just a sense of belonging or kind of engagement or just kind of optimism about their role. So like all these things were actually better with remote. And so I think that's what a lot of people are feeling right now is that, one, I like the freedom. This feels better in a lot of ways, giving me the opportunity to be remote more than not. And then two, we actually seen like evidence that it works better for a lot of teams. And so that's where I would say, I think it feels at odds with some of the big tech return to office, acknowledging that, look, some companies will always do it that way and kind of to each their own. But I'm firmly in the remote camp and really just couldn't appreciate more and be more committed to this style of working.
I dig it. Your passion for it shines through both in the way that you talk about this and in the product. So I appreciate that. And with that, I just want to say thank you, Steve, for making the time, being generous with your time and perspective. Folks want to learn more about you or the work that you're doing over at Whimsical. Where should they go?
Yep. Well, you can find Whimsical at whimsical.com. We'd love for you to check out the product and what we're building there. And me just on social, X, LinkedIn, at Steve Schoeffel. And that's probably the best place.
Good deal. Steve, a pleasure. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Jack. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on Distributed. If you want to learn more about what we covered in this episode, or if you want to share your own thoughts, follow @Tuple on X or visit distributed.fm.